On behalf of the CarIPI team and the EU IPO and WSPR, the West Indies Rum and Spirits Producers Association, who is partnering with us on this event, I wish to thank you and welcome you for joining us today on this webinar, The Benefits of Geographical Indications to the Rum Sector in the Region. Today we have approximately 94 participants who will be joining us. Not everyone have onboarded as yet, but they will be joining shortly. I am Wendy Hollingsworth, and I will be your moderator for today. At this point, we'll start the morning's proceedings by having our welcome and opening remarks, which will be provided by Mr. Vaughan Ringwick, the CEO of WSPR, and Alexandra Mayer, who is the CarIPI project leader. We'll start first with Mr. Ringwick. Vaughan?
Morning, everyone, and very pleased to see good numbers here with us today. I'll be very, very brief. We are collaborating with CarIPI on this project and very ably assisted from the European Union Intellectual Property Office. We're very pleased to be able to collaborate with them. This is, I think, the first in what I hope to be several discussions on GIs and intellectual property as it relates to the rum industry. It is really just the first start. It is focusing on rum. There's a plethora of resources out there on GIs and many, many webinars, but very few of them focus exclusively on spirits and on rum. So we want to have a conversation that's more relatable to our interests and our industry, and that is what this is intended to start. The objectives are really to begin to raise awareness about GIs and how they relate to other intellectual property tools, and to then, I think, enable national producers to make decisions about what's the best route for them. So as I say, it's really a start, and we're very pleased to be collaborating with EU IPO and CarIPI on this. Thank you very much.
I'm Alexandra Mayer, the project leader of the CarIPI project. This project it's funded by the 11th European Development Fund. Its objective is to strengthen the IP rights framework in the CARIFORUM as a means of fostering trade and investment and stimulating innovation and competitiveness in the private sector. It is a project that is conducted in the context of the Economic Partnership Agreement signed between the CARIFORUM and the EU member states. And it is the first specific support program since it was signed in 2008 in the field of IP. Thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy this webinar.
Today we have three key presenters. Audrey Aubard, who will be presenting on just giving an idea of the different IP tools that can be applied to in the rum industry. Mr. Matt Petrick, who would also give a presentation on the trademarks and GIs within the region. And finally, our last speaker will be Aitor Pomares, who will sort of give you that experience and different approaches that have been used in the area of geographical indications with specific cases for the rum sector. So I'll welcome our first speaker for today, Audrey Aubard, who will, as I mentioned, her particular presentation. Audrey is a legal expert on intellectual property, food law, and labeling issues. She is specialized in developing quality schemes, management strategies, developing certification tools, and assisting the development of producers' organizations. She works with producers who want to promote and protect the quality of their products, either as a geographical indication, organic products, or any other labeling strategy, labeling and branding strategy. In this context, she has worked with both regional and international producers. Audrey, I welcome you to make your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Wendy. Good morning or good afternoon to all of you. I will share my presentation with you. So today I will speak on the trademark GIs and giving you some information in order to have an idea on which could be the most useful tool that can be used for your product. So in terms of content.
Please, I'm sorry, can you click in slideshow mode?
Sorry?
Click in slideshow.
This one.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, sorry. Sorry. So I will address 4 issues. First of all, the interest of what we call origin-linked products, the interest of the intellectual property rights for this kind of projects, a short overview of the legal means you could choose, and then trying to conclude with the benefits of these kind of strategies. So let's start with the interest of origin-linked products. First of all, we have to raise the issue, what is an origin-linked product? These kind of products are most of the time local products that are based on territorial identity and or reputation. They are also based on specific modes of production or traditional modes of production, and the quality or the specificities of the product are linked or attributable to the geographical origin. Most of the time, this product can be defined as product that can be eligible as geographical indication or trademark protection. And we have some famous cases as the Jamaican Blue Mountain Coffee, the cheese Parmigiano Reggiano, the Cerámicas de Chulucanas in Peru, or the argan oil from Morocco. There are some specific criteria for this product to be eligible as origin-linked product. Of course, it's obvious that we need some products. It can be one product or a family of products. We need a link with the origin, like the know-how, a specific quality, a reputation. We need also stakeholders that can be men, women, institutions as well. We need as well a territory, because the products are based on the territory, and this territory can be a city, can be a region, or can be sometimes a country. For this product, in order to get added value, there are some tools, and we will speak about this tool just afterwards. And it is also important to define a strategy on how to use, to manage, and to promote the product and the IP tools that will be used with these products. So there is a clear interest on the collective branding, and we will see the reasons why just afterward. Why? Because we will get some added value, we will get more promotion collectively on this origin-linked product, and this added value will also be profitable for the actors, means the producers, and also the territory. So I will enter in the interest of the intellectual property tools for these origin-linked products. So most of the time, small producers often face competition from bigger or standardized industrial products. So they need to get more recognition and more consumer recognition. So most of the time, it is difficult for small producers to develop a powerful communication or management strategy that will enable them to position on the market and to make their products visible. So the interest of working on collective branding or collective strategy means that they can benefit from economies of scale. They can have a broader brand recognition being all together than being alone. So why it is interesting to think about marketing strategies to differentiate origin-linked product from the standardized product on the market. Today's, well, we speak about the labels of the product or the official seals of the product. Having an origin-linked product and using intellectual property tool can give a true information about the origin, about the quality of the product. And this type of information is interesting, and sometimes it is requested by the consumers. The consumers are nowadays more and more interested in real information. information on qualities, information on certification, information on specificities of the product, and they need to have some guarantees that this information is real. So the brand recognition can be a tool, an interesting tool to provide this kind of information. And why? Because this origin branding will provide information for the consumer and will also enable the producer to give concrete information. So if we use intellectual property rights, and collective signs, it is important for different purposes. First of all, it will identify a company, it will identify an association, it will identify a collectivity of people. It will also identify the products for the consumers. For the owner of this intellectual property right, it will be a way to capture market share, to make it visible on the market and to capture market share and to gain consumers' trust, as I said just before. It will be also a way to value the existence of the product of the company and to try to avoid confusion with competitors. Why? Because IPR are rights, and once we have some rights, we can have some legal tools in order to protect these rights. And it will be also a communication tool, of course, because we need some logo, we need some designs, we need to be recognized on the market. So intellectual property rights can be used as well as marketing tools. So there is a real strength of collective rights. Why? Because if we have an individual right, we will have an individual marketing based on our company, our product. If we work in a collective way, we will have a joint marketing reference to the reputation and to ascertain quality origin of the product. So let's enter now in the overview of the legal means of protection. I will separate two types of intellectual property rights. One, it will be dedicated to trademarks, and the second will be more dedicated to geographical indications, and then we can see the links between them. So speaking about origin-linked products, these origin-linked products can be protected by the trademark law. This trademark law can protect the verbal trademarks in certain legal framework and can protect as well semi-figurative trademarks, which is the combination of a verbal sign plus a design. As I said just before, in certain countries, the registration of the verbal trademark can be difficult because sometimes it is just prohibited by certain legal frameworks. One other aspect of the trademark that have been raised in many countries is the concern of the cost of enforcing the trademark rights. So let's go quickly to the individual trademarks, because it's just a reminder for you, because we are not supposed to speak about the individual branding today. So just an example, you have many trademarks that you will know in this picture. Coca-Cola, it means it protects a company, or it protects, like Moët & Chandon, a product like champagne produced by Moët & Chandon. So one product, one enterprise, and not a collective branding. We have the use as well of individual trademarks to make what we call a segmentation. It means that we have some trademarks that can be used for different types of product. I give you the example of some chocolates in the Caribbean region, and as well the example of Etikable, which is a specific trademark that is used for fair trade products. We have the trademark but within this trademark, we have different types of products that are promoted through this individual trademark that belongs to an enterprise. Let's go now to the collective trademark. The collective trademark is a form of a trademark, obviously, but it's owned by a collective, like an association, for instance, or cooperative. And the members of this collective can identify the goods or the services, and they can distinguish the goods from those of the non-members, and this will enable them to indicate the membership of the group. They can indicate as well a certain type of origin or a certain type of philosophy of this group. So how does it work? Normally, when you register a collective trademark, it's the same thing as an individual trademark, but you need to add what we call a rule of use. And in this rule of use, you can develop some rules of using the trademark. It means using the trademark in certain kind of way to elaborate the product. So you can define some process of elaborating the product. You can define some controls aspect that can be processed by the association, for instance, and you can develop as well some rules concerning the use of the logo or the promotion tools. As I said just before, the owner will be an association and the cooperative, and the users will be the members of this association or the cooperative. Normally, the owner do not use the mark for commercial purposes. They can do it for promotion purposes in fair, for instance, and normally it is the owners, they are the owners that have to use this trademark following the definition and the content of the rule of use. So it can be an interesting strategy using a collective trademark. Why? Because it is easy. I mean, it is easy to define some rule of use. It is easy to register, much more easy than a geographical indication, for instance. And most of the time, when the producer are not ready to be gathered and to enter in a GI strategy, it can be the first step in order to organize collectively and to see if they are able to work collectively. The trademark shall be renewed every 10 years. It's the same principle as every type of trademark. And as I mentioned before, the cost of protection can be costly. We have this example, which is the example of the Marseille soap. This group of producers were not able to register a geographical indication. However, they decided to create a logo. You can see the logo on the bottom of the slide. And this logo means that this soap is produced respecting the traditional recipe of the Marseille soap. Now let's go to the certification trademarks. So the certification trademarks are a type of collective trademark, but we are going higher in the type of requested regulation of use and conditions to define the rule of use. In this case, the trademark will identify some goods or services that will meet some certain standards or specifications. Okay, these standards or specification can include quality, accuracy, place of origin, raw materials, a lot of things that can be included in this certification trademark that will be certified. It means certified by a certification body. The principle of the certification trademark is quite the same as for the collective trademark. We need the definition of the regulation of use or rule of use as for the collective trademark. The owner can be an independent enterprise, but it can be as well a collectivity, because we have the case today in certain countries. As it is a certification trademark, the use of this trademark is certified most of the time by a certification body. And one of the difference with the collective trademark, normally the membership is not compulsory. So, for instance, you can see some of the of these logos that you can know perfectly. And most of the time, the logos of the organic farming products are used on a certification trademark basis. It is the case for USDA organic. It is the case in France as well. The AB organic farming is a certification trademark. We have the case for Jamaica Blue Mountain. And as well, I put the logo of EcoCert, but EcoCert has a lot of certification trademarks depending on the services they are providing. These certification trademarks are based on the regulation of use and authorization of use based on the control and the granting of a certification certificate. So this is the difference between a collective trademark and certification trademark. The certification trademark will provide a higher guarantee for the product because the product has a very specific quality. And as for the limits of these trademarks concerning the protection, which is granted only for 10 years, and the cost of the protection that can be high, depending on the trademark, it is the same limits are for collective trademarks. Now let's go into the geographical indication, which is a specific type of intellectual property rights. Most of the time, the geographical indication are names that are protected broadly, I would say, and it is a right that will apply to any producer, processor within the defined geographical area that will respect the product specification. And normally it is a collective and open IP right. It means every producer located in the area which is able to respect the specification can use the geographical indication. So what is interesting with the geographical indication protection, and maybe as for certification trademark, it is an IPR tool, but with multifunctional character. We are speaking about IPR, but we are speaking about quality scheme as well, which is quite important when it comes to agricultural or agro-food. And what is important with this kind of product is the exclusive link between the name and the product that give the product a real value. So to protect GI, it would be more or less the same, the same thing as for the collective certification trademark. We need a specific protection through registration, which is normally longer than a trademark registration. We need a product specification, which is most of the time defined in a GI law. And in this law, we can have definition of the product, the specific characteristic, the link with the geographical region, the delimitation of the geographical area, for instance. As it is a collective and most of the time a public tool, it will be controlled as well. And in Europe, for instance, most of the GI are certified. And we will have also some protection and legal tools using frauds, using customs, for instance, and the GI can be protected, included in the ingredients and also in the internet. To finish, in practice, I would like to speak about the collaboration between GIs and trademarks, because most of the time we say, well, trademarks are bad with GIs, and in practice, when there is no problem, we have a good collaboration. Why? Because GI protects the name and trademark can protect a design. So we need some designs today to be recognized on the market. So a GI in the course of the trade cannot exist with a logo. And I give you some examples. And especially for small producers, when they are working on collective branding, it is useful to work all together. And as I said before, to set up a collective branding that can be a solution to make economy of scale in terms of promotion. Lastly, I will conclude with the positive impacts of OLP strategies we know nowadays. Why? Because as I mentioned before, there is a real interest in differentiation of the product for the producers, for the consumers, because the consumers have a guarantee, and they have to be think as economic tools and strategical tools for the value chains. Some key issues. The quality approach, we spoke about the certification, maybe with the Q&A we can raise these issues. We have the market access as well. The market access accepts today the origin branding products. It is important to maintain the know-how, the tradition, the employment, to preserve the heritage of the production, and to respect the consumer demand. So we know today that origin link product and origin link branding has specific and very positive impacts in terms of local development, because there is a value for the product as intangible element of the territorial development, and not only the agricultural product, but all the products that are present within the territories. The product strategies and the collective products strategy are integrated in the territorial development approaches that enable economic development, employment, etc., and tourism as well. And we need to think about this strategy as sustainable strategies and sustainable vision of the territories. Thank you for your attention. I hope I respected the time.
Thank you very much, Audrey, for bringing together the different tools of intellectual property tools that can be used and applied to origin link products. If there are any questions at this point for Audrey, we can entertain one or two questions.
Perhaps while anybody else might think of a question they want to ask, I think I want to thank Audrey for that presentation. She ran through quite a few slides there in her allotted time, so congratulations on maintaining the time. I was pleasantly surprised. The whole issue of spirits is, of course, very specific, and as we talk about collective marks and GIs, I always advise producers, especially if there's more than one producer in a country, to think carefully about what are the objectives of your intellectual property needs. What is it that you really want to do with intellectual property as a group, as a representing a country identity. Also to say that the ACR mark, Authentic Caribbean Rum mark, that WSPA created probably around the mid-2000s has many of the elements of a collective mark, even though it's not actually registered as a collective mark. And it may well become formally a collective mark in the future. It is a membership-driven mark, and it has some elements of certification because it describes minimal processes. And of course, there is some overlap between collective marks and certification marks, and we'll mention that a bit more, I think, in the next presentation. Thanks.
We will move to the next presentation, and that is the presentation of Matt Patrick, who will speak on rum GIs and trademarks in the Caribbean region. Matt is an independent rum author, educator, historian, and consultant. As the community envoy for WSPA, he connects the growing rum enthusiast community with CARIFORUM rum producers. With that introduction, Matt, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. And my name is Matt Patrick. I'm the WSPA Community Envoy. That's my email address there. If anybody would like to email me at any point, happy to entertain questions, not only during this, but also later. So I wanted to start out this presentation by talking about the popular perception of rum, at least within the enthusiast community. There's a wonderful book written about rum. It's called And a Bottle of Rum, written by Wayne Curtis around 2005. And it says, rum embodies America's laissez-faire attitude. It is whatever it wants to be. There's no international oversight board, and its taste and production varies widely, leaving the market to sort out favorites. Rum is the melting pot of spirits, the only liquor available in clear, amber, or black variations. And it's a great idea. It's a great quote, but I think it's led to a lot of misperception with people as they sort of simplify this to rum has no rules. And as I started to look into rum and started to write about it, I came to the realization that there are lots of rules in rum, and that most people just aren't aware of this. And the more I dug, the more I said, there's more regulations in rum than any other spirit category than I could think of. And so this presentation is focused on specifically on Caribbean rum, not rum around the world. So the first thing in terms of a GI or any sort of territorial recognition for your product, this sort of the baseline that everybody doesn't have any issue with is that it should be fermented and distilled from sugarcane in the region that you're claiming. So for example, Jamaican rum at a minimum should be fermented and distilled from sugarcane in Jamaica. Now, countries may add their own additional requirements, and as we'll see, many have, but nobody thinks it would be a good idea to make Trinidad rum that was fermented in Guyana, for example. It doesn't work that way. So baseline fermented and distilled, and everything else is on top of that. So I first want to start out by mentioning the CARICOM rum standard, which was, as I recall, ratified in 2008. And it is essentially, it is not a GI in and of itself. It's essentially, you can think of it almost as, and Vaughn can correct me, but it's essentially, it's the template that the CARICOM countries agree on in terms of what is a minimum definition for rum. And it's not a definition for, say, Trinidad rum or Barbados rum. It's a definition for rum, wherever it comes from. And so at a very high level, I just excerpted just a sort of key part here at the beginning, is that rum is a spirit drink. It's obtained exclusively from the fermentation and distillation of sugarcane products, cane juice, molasses, what have you. And it is distilled to less than 96% alcohol by volume at 20 Celsius. And it's made in a way that it retains the characteristics of the underlying material, the sugar source. And then lastly, that it must be rum from only rum. You could not put in neutral alcohol. You could not add in a grain-based spirit and still call it rum. So this was a regulation essentially a regulation that the CARICOM countries agreed to and said, okay, this will essentially be a foundation for all of our regulations, and we can, of course, build on that and make our own more specific regulation. But this is a baseline. So in terms of the Caribbean countries or territories that have rum regulations, I've sort of divided them up into two sort of categories. Some which have GIs, and those GIs which have been already registered and essentially acknowledged by the European Union, basically have protection in the European Union. Turns out that France actually has 7 GIs related to cane spirits. Not all of them are Caribbean rum, but 7 GIs related to cane spirits. And the list down there is down at the bottom if you care. I've listed the 5 that are specific to the Caribbean. Guyana, just in the last few days, has achieved international or EU recognition for its Demerara rum GI. Guatemala also has a GI and has it registered in the European Union. And although they're not formally recognized as of yet, both Cuba and Venezuela have also taken their national GIs and submitted them to the European Union, hoping for protection there. The other set of regulations may be local GIs or local regulations which aren't necessarily in the form of a GI. Perhaps the best known there is Jamaica. It has a GI ratified in 2016 or 2017. I forget exactly which date, but fairly recent. Jamaica has a GI. And then Costa Rica, Panama, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico all have regulations of some sort of varying levels of complexity and specificity as to what must be done to call it, for example, a Panama rum or a Puerto Rican rum. So this is just a brief overview of what regulations are out there. And there's a few more, but these are the main ones I wanted to highlight here. So in looking at all these GIs and regulations, and looking at the specific sections, and it was a lot of work looking over something like 14 different regulations, I broke down the things that they bothered to specify and made categories around them. So not every GI addresses each one of these points, but each of these points has been addressed in 2 or more GIs or regulations. So just very quickly, local water means that there's a specific requirement that the water used in the production must come from a specific area or region within that country or territory. So for example, Jamaica's GI actually includes a map of the water must come from these aquifers. Another is local fermentation source material. So basically, for example, in Martinique, the sugarcane juice must come from locally grown sugarcane in specific, there's actually designated regions. Another one is yeast varietals. Some GIs don't mention this at all. Others are very specific about what strains of yeast are used. Another is fermentation requirements. Some GIs actually specify like a maximum length on fermentation, perhaps a maximum alcohol percentage, alcohol by volume resulting from the fermentation, things like that. Basically any requirements as to what the fermentation must look like. Then there are distillation requirements. At the simplest perspective, you might just specify your distillation must be between this range or this strength and this strength. For example, the Martinique AOC specifies distillation must be between 65% and 75% ABV. You can also have more specific things like the distillation must be in a column still or might be in a pot still, or even potentially the parameters of the still. And in fact, Martinique AOC also references that. There's a limitation on how white it is and how many plates it has. One of particular, I was particularly surprised by was how many reference or what I call organic compound requirements. So there are basically specific ranges of, say, volatile compounds that must be present, or ester levels, basically the things that you would determine by a laboratory analysis of the chemical makeup of the rum. This is a very popular requirement listed in many GIs. Another one is minimum aging in wood. For example, by that means like it cannot be called rum unless it is aged in wood for a particular duration in time. Another related topic is local aging. Like in order to carry that name, it must be aged at origin rather than somewhere else. Another one, I think of particular interest to a lot of people is whether finishing additives are allowed other than caramel. I'm not aware of any GI that prohibits caramel, but other GIs, some explicitly allow other additives. Others are mute on the point. It's one of the more interesting things to dwell on. We don't have time here, but it is an interesting thing to look at. And then lastly, of this sort of category of requirements, common requirements, is whether the bottling must occur locally, again, to carry that designation. So I've sort of put together a couple of examples, one from a French region, one from an English-speaking region, one from a Spanish region, or Spanish-speaking region, to highlight the ways that they each tie some of these requirements to their specific locale. Basically, they're connecting their geographical indication to being from their territory. So of course, the Martinique AOC requires the sugarcane be grown in specific regions, must be harvested in that region. You know, they go together. Must be processed again in the same region. Must be distilled there. It must be rested in vats there. Is aged there and bottled there. So it's very specific. And essentially, you have to do everything there. In terms of Jamaica, the key requirements that I see in the GI, and and again, some of these may be subject to interpretation. Different people might interpret a GI's clauses differently, but from my perspective, the key aspects tying Jamaican rum to Jamaica is that the fermentation, distillation, and aging must occur in Jamaica. In terms of the Dominican Republic, their requirement is that it has local sugarcane, that local sugarcane be used, the sugarcane products. Jamaica does not have that. Jamaica is able to make rum imported from molasses imported from elsewhere. But again, local sugar source, fermentation, distillation, and aging. So the key idea here is that each country sort of picks a set of specific criteria from that broader list I showed on the prior slide. And so that's sort of like the general framework you see in all these various geographical indications. Vaughn, did you want to add anything at this point? Okay.
I think I'll make a couple of comments at the end, Matt.
Okay. Okay, just to drill in a little bit, the topic of organic compound parameters or requirements. I just wanted to show you a couple of examples. The Cuban GI, I can't pronounce the full DOP, how that's said there, but Cuban GI is fairly specific. It's expressing that the bottled rum must be within a specified strength range, ranges on acidity, aldehydes, ester level. It's funny, it's like the maximum esters of 90, and that in Jamaican rum, 90 is just sort of getting started in terms of esters. Higher alcohols, methanol, things like that. Basically, things that are generally lumped into what is frequently referred to as volatile compounds. The Cuban GI is fairly specific there. The recently, I guess, registered or published Demerara GI also has some similar requirements. That the minimum strength must be 40% alcohol by volume. And then it designates 3 categories of Demerara rum: light-bodied, medium-bodied, heavy-bodied, and essentially assigns them a range of volatile compounds in general, and then pulling out esters specifically. And basically, light has the lowest, medium has a range, and then heavy is anything higher than that. And then it also takes the time to specify levels of acetic acid, for example, in there. And there are many more. I don't want to use this whole presentation to go over all of them, but you'll see in many GIs, they look something like this. In comparing across these different GIs, just a couple of key takeaways I wanted to basically key summary points that I came to. First off is that many GIs specify multiple grades, basically different tiers of rum, typically based on the duration of aging. And so you can think of that as for example, a rum vo, or XO, things like that. Basically, it's typically a minimum aging length to call yourself, X country rum age designation. Generally, the French GIs, the AOC and the PGIs are generally the very, very detailed and most prescriptive about how that rum must be made. The Spanish heritage territories, places like Venezuela, Guatemala, places like that, they tend to place Cuba especially, they tend to place a lot of emphasis on the aging requirements. They're very prescriptive there, with less detail given, say, to fermentation. Also, it's not surprising, but territories or countries that have a vibrant local sugarcane economy tend to require that the rums be made from that sugarcane. Rum or territories, countries that don't have a sugar industry capable of completely supplying its industry tend to not require that it be made from that country's local cane. Interestingly, we find that the addition of additives, in particular, what I find is that some GIs explicitly allow it. Just might be somewhat surprising to some people, but some GIs explicitly allow it, and many GIs just leave the topic open. And so what sometimes we get is a difference of interpretation as to what does this GI address this issue or not. And in many cases, it doesn't say anything about that. And then last but not least, there are certainly some GIs that are essentially defined by a single producers. The ones that come to mind, of course, being Guyana, Cuba, in the form of the fact that Cuba's government runs their rum industry, Guatemala, French Guyana, and the Martinique Lake Galeon PGI are all GIs that essentially address just one single producer. I also wanted to talk a little bit about how rum GIs compare to other GIs also recognized by the European Union in other spirit categories. So Vaughn and I discussed it, and we decided that Martinique AOC, tequila from Mexico, Pisco, Peruvian Pisco, I should have said Peruvian Pisco there, and single malt Scotch whiskey were good examples to sort of put a rum GI up against these other GIs and compare them. And in terms of, I sort of collapsed the 12 or 14 general requirements down to a smaller set. But basically, what do they require? Local source material? Do they put requirements on fermentation, on distillation? Do they have organic compound requirements? Do they require local aging to be done locally? And they require bottling to be done locally? And what we see is that, for example, the Martinique AOC, which in fairness is the most prescriptive of the Caribbean GIs, is very specific. It has requirements in all of these categories. We see, but on the other hand, we see tequila is also fairly prescriptive if you look at it. It's a little surprising, but fairly prescriptive. However, it leaves the issue of fermentation much more open. It does not really address specifics of fermentation. Similarly, we see the same thing with Pisco. It again does not really delve into the fermentation specifics the way the Martinique AOC does. In terms of local aging, it's actually, my understanding is that you actually cannot age Peruvian Pisco. Like if you did, it would not be Peruvian Pisco. And then surprisingly, Scotch whiskey, single malt Scotch whiskey, I pulled, Scotch whiskey is an overall GI, but single malt Scotch whiskey is a specific example of it. That is actually surprisingly, it does not require local grains. It does not really address much about the issue of fermentation. It has no specific ranges for volatiles or organic compounds. So I think we're safe to say here that a well-crafted rum GI can hold its own against many other geographical indications in the spirits world. I wanted to touch on briefly about the Authentic Caribbean Rum Mark, or ACR mark, that Vaughn mentioned earlier on in the presentation. This is basically a mark or logo that products that meet the criteria may use on their labels and in their product marketing. And essentially, if you look at the requirements to use the ACR mark, it mirrors very closely the CARICOM rum standard. It was created as part of the Caribbean Rum Sector Program, the program that ran from around 2003 to 2016 or so. Basically, the program that WERSPA managed part of managing the Caribbean rum sector program was also creating and managing the ACR mark and enforcing that it's being used properly. There are three different tiers of ACR that you can use. The first one is just that it must be produced from sugarcane or molasses within the ACP Caribbean. Second is what they call matured, must have aged for at least 1 year. And the third, deluxe, is that it must have been aged for at least 5 years. So this mark is out there, and Von may wish to speak to it at the end. And then just a little bit about the United States and geographic indications. I am from the United States, and so I'm keenly interested in this topic myself. In the US, we do not intrinsically recognize geographic indications when they appear. Instead, in the US regulations, there's something known as a standard of identity. So in the US code, there are standards of identity specifically calling out very loose requirements, but specifically calling out what is the definition of bourbon, what's the definition of bourbon whiskey, what's the definition of rye whiskey, what is the definition of Scotch whiskey, cognac, tequila, rum, et cetera, et cetera. But again, those definitions are usually very, very loose. So the definition of rum in the US, rum as a spirit, the rum standard of identity is rum is an alcoholic distillate from the fermented juice of sugarcane, et cetera, produced at less than 190 proof, so less than 95% alcohol, in such a manner that the distillate has the taste and aroma and characteristics of rum, must be bottled at least 80 proof, 40% ABV. So that's in the US, if you meet those criteria, your product can be called rum. Now, if you want your particular spirit product to be recognized and have its own country-specific regulations enforced by the UI or enforced by the United States, sorry, you need to get the US government to create a standard of identity for that specific product or for that specific spirit. And the way this works is that there's if you look at the standards of identity for things like tequila or Peruvian pisco or things like that, I'm sorry, tequila or cachaça or whiskey, Scotch whiskey, you'll see there's generally a template wording where it says, for example, Scotch whiskey is manufactured in Scotland in accordance with the laws and regulations of Scotland governing the manufacture of Scotch whiskey. So essentially what the US does is say, we recognize that this spirit has a standard of identity, and the rules for it are whatever that country says they are. So whatever that GI currently says, that's what forms the standard of identity. So the US doesn't, if a GI were to change, the US regulations don't have to change. So there's a way of getting your geographic indication recognized, but you need to go through this different step of making a geographic or a standard of identity that references it. So far, the only cane spirit country-specific cane spirit that has achieved recognition as a standard of identity, other than just rum above, is Brazilian cachaça. And that was around 2013, I believe it was recognized. So even though, for example, Jamaica has a GI, it has no intrinsic recognition in the United States. So in the United States, in theory, somebody else could label a product as Jamaican rum that did not meet the Jamaican GI requirements, but because the US does not recognize that GI as a standard of identity, there's no protection for it. So, questions? And I'll stop my share.
Matt, perhaps I could.
Oh yeah, Matt. Yeah, sorry.
Just a couple of points. Just to say that, I mean, there's a massive amount of information to be considered in these issues, and we're only here talking about spirits, which is why I say that this is really just a first conversation. So just finally on that point, that final point, Matt, about the US regulations, there is in fact, there are other parts of the US regulations that recognized terms that are associated with countries. So in fact, it would not be possible for somebody just to simply call their product by one of the names that are recognized, such as Jamaica rum or Trinidad rum. Although it's not exactly a separate standard of identity, there are other protections. But just to pull out a couple points, I think one of the interesting things is looking at the Scotch whiskey technical specification, or GI. We regard Scotch whiskey as one of the strongest GIs internationally for spirits, but in fact, it's relatively open, as I think you mentioned. And even though malt whiskey is a bit tighter in general, it's fairly open on water sources. It doesn't talk about organic compounds. There's no bottling requirement, and there's no raw material requirement because, of course, Scotland cannot produce its own grain for all this Scotch whiskey it requires. And in a sense, we have a similar situation here in the Caribbean community in CARICOM. We would not develop a GI that requires the use of local molasses or local sugarcane juice because we have not enough of our own supply. And this is not unique to us, of course. As you can see, it applies to Scotch whiskey as well. So most of the GIs you would find coming out of our community would be talking about excuse me, starting the process from fermentation and distillation as opposed to actual sugarcane. Now, it's entirely possible if you're designing a GI to have different classifications in there. So for instance, you could have a Grenada GI that had several classes of product. You could have standard rum, or you could have rum, a particular name for it that was produced from sugarcane grown in Grenada. And I say that because there is now a new distillery in Grenada that's making rum from its own sugarcane grown in Grenada. So you can have those grades. For the DR has designed what is a slightly stronger GI, normally called denomination of origin, which requires the use of local sugarcane materials, local molasses. I don't think it's completely finalized yet. There are many actors in the DR who have an interest in this, and it has been a difficult route for the authentic rum producers in the Dominican Republic. Another issue of interest, I think, is Matt referred to was single producer applications as opposed to multi-producer applications. And now with the EU, a single producer can apply for a GI to the EU after it's established in national legislation. And you quoted, I think, Guatemala and Cuba and Guyana. Guyana is slightly different since the application is not for Guyana rum per se, but it is for Demerara rum. And again, it's not an exclusive definition because anybody located in Demerara meeting that GI condition can then, in theory, produce Demerara rum. In Guatemala, and we're going to hear a bit more about that in the next presentation, the single producer, which is a very large producer, has a definition that is very specific geographically in Guatemala. And so the question arises, what about the other producers in Guatemala who are not, as they say, aging in the clouds? So I think these are some important issues to consider when you're looking at a GI. Many of the GIs from Central and South America refer or have an underpinning in terms of their national standards. So for instance, they might not mention flavoring or the use of additives in the GI, but they do make a reference to the national standard, and the national standard does often in Latin America permit the use of flavors, which I should say are not permitted in CARICOM. And so this opens a question about the GI if those products are being sold, for instance, in the European Union, where flavoring additives are not permitted. So that's an ongoing debate. And as you can see, if we wanted to pick apart this subject, we would be spending another couple of hours at least on just some of these issues. So those are some of the things I wanted to mention. And thanks, Matt. And I give over to anybody else or the next presentation.
So our next presenter is Aitor Pomares, who is a partner at Barringer and Pomares and specializes in, well, he specializes in intellectual property and competition law. He oversees at the firm, he oversees the Geographical Indications Department, where he provides legal advice to producer groups and also to certification bodies. He's also works in building and developing geographical indications and their product specifications, as well as prosecution of infringements and enforcement of rights before relevant competent bodies. And in this context, he has also worked within the region developing specifications for origin link products, and also he has worked in the registration of regional GIs in the EU. Aitor, welcome to make your presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Wendy. And well, good morning, everyone, or good evening if you are in Europe. Well, let me first of all share my screen. Okay. Well, the idea of my presentation was to introduce the system of geographical indication in the European Union and to present the experiences of 3 foreign geographical indications for spirit drinks that have been protected in the territory of the European Union. And by foreign GIs, I mean geographical indication not originated in the European Union. Well, for that, I should start explaining that in the European Union, at the present time, we have 3 different routes in order to get protection of a foreign GI in our territory. Okay, first one would be the proper sui generis system of geographical indications in the European Union. That in this case is governed by regulation to 787 of 2019 on the protection of geographical indication for spirit drinks. Okay. This is the regulation dealing with the quality scheme for geographical indications. In the European Union, currently we have 4 different categories of goods that can be protected under these quality schemes of the geographical indication or designation of origin. In addition to spirits, we have wines, aromatized wine, and another category which is composed by the rest of agricultural products and foodstuffs.
Aitor, I'm sorry. So, can you change your device of the microphone because this Bluetooth is worse.
To try. So it's
yeah, because the Bluetooth is not working well.
It's not working. Okay, so I'm going to try with the microphone of the cam. Okay, you tell me, what about now?
Yeah, it's better. Thank you.
Okay. Welcome. Okay. So as I was saying, we have 4 categories of products that can be protected under this scheme of the geographical indication in the European Union. Okay, what it's important to underline here is that in the European Union, we can only seek protection for the whole European territory. Okay, for this category of goods, the 4 that I mentioned, we cannot seek protection nationally. And I mean in a specific member state. We can either get protection at the whole EU level or get no protection at all. Okay, under this system, the sui generis system, we have to go through a proper registration procedure in order to get protection in the European Union by submitting all the relevant information about the concerned GI or the concerned product. Okay. The second route will be the international system of geographical indication and appellation of origins, which is governed by the WIPO. Okay. As you probably know, the European Union acceded to the Geneva Act of the Lisbon Agreement in November of 2019. Okay, and this Geneva Act entered into force in February last year. Okay, to this regard, I think it's important to underline that
the EU has only become party to the Geneva Act, not to the original Lisbon Agreement. And I say this because I have checked that currently there are no countries from the CARIPI Forum that have acceded to the Geneva Act. Okay, so for countries like Cuba or the Dominican Republic that are party to the original Lisbon Agreement, they will have to, this country will have to also accede to the Geneva Act in order for the producers to obtain protection of the geographical indication in the European Union under this international system. Okay? As you probably know, this is a system of international protection of GIs. It basically consists of extending protection of GIs that are registered nationally to other countries. Okay. And finally, the third route for getting protection of foreign GIs would be via the bilateral agreements. These are political agreements that are signed between the European Union and a third country or a group of countries. Okay, this may either be a specific standalone agreement on geographical indication, or it can also be a broader trade agreement with a specific chapter on geographical indication. Okay, the system here basically consists in that both parties, the European Union and the third country, afford reciprocal protection to the geographical indication of each party. Okay, and I have also checked this, and unfortunately, currently there are no agreements of this kind signed between the European Union and any of the countries of the CARIPI Forum. Okay,
I may just intersect here that this is negotiations that are going on for some time. So your countries, you might have been involved, are negotiating this list of GIs that from the region would be protected, as well as the text of the agreement, which is like a rendezvous clause of the EPA signed in 2008.
Thanks a lot, Alessandra. That's right. It takes time to sign these agreements. Okay, so hopefully in the near future we have this agreement signed between the European Union and Caribbean countries, because I think it's a very interesting tool for getting protection quickly for geographical indication and avoiding a registration procedure that I have to say it takes time in the European Union, the registration procedure under the sui generis system that it's the one I explained earlier. Okay, so I will explain a little bit more about the sui generis system. As I explained, is governed by this regulation of 2019. According to this regulation, a geographical indication is an indication which identifies a spirit drink as originated in the territory of a country or a region or locality in that territory, where a given quality, reputation, or other characteristic of that spirit drink is essentially attributable to its geographical origin. Okay, so interested to point out on this regard. In the European Union, we only have one concept of geographical indication for spirit drinks. For those who are familiar with the system in the European Union, maybe you know that in other category of products, in wines or in foodstuffs, we have two different concepts: geographical indication and designation of origin. Okay, designation of origin, the difference is that the products covered by designation of origin, they show a tighter link between the product and the geographical area. For instance, because all the production steps must take place in the defined geographical indication. This is not the case for geographical indication, for GI, where it's sufficient if only one of the production steps take place within the defined geographical area. Matt and Vaughan were already discussing about this. Some countries or some products, maybe they cannot produce all the raw materials that are needed for the production of the final product, in this case the spirit drinks, the rum. That will not be an obstacle for getting protection in the EU under the concept of geographical indication, because it is sufficient if the aging of the product or the last step of the production are done within the geographical area. As I explained, in this case, we have to go through a proper registration procedure. We have to submit our application before the European Commission, specifically before the Directorate General for Agriculture and Rural Development. Okay. And in this case, for foreign GIs, the application can be submitted either by the authorities of the country of origin or directly by the group of producers working with the product. And finally, important characteristic of the system is that in that application, the applicant, the foreign applicant, must provide proof that the name of the product, the name of the GI, is already protected in the country of origin. And one note here, this protection ideally will be a protection as a geographical indication, but the Commission can only accept protection in other forms of intellectual property, especially for those countries where no geographical indication legislation is in place. Okay, so in these cases, the applicant could try to prove that the name of the GI is protected, for instance, by means of a collective trademark or a certification trademark, like Audrey explained before, or even to try to prove that the name is protected under the labeling rule. Okay, that would be accepted as long as the product complies with the requirements and taking into account that maybe in that country of origin they don't have a specific GI legislation. And well, as I explained, in this case, we have to submit a proper application dossier with a lot of information, and the most important document will be the product specification, which will explain all the characteristics of the product and our GI. This is the main content of the product specification. First, we have to disclose the name of the GI. It cannot be, of course, an invented name. It has to be the name as it is used in trade or in common language. Secondly, we have to indicate the category of the spirit drink we want to protect: rum, gin, whatever spirit, whiskey, whatever. We must also disclose a description of the product, including a description of the raw materials, if applicable, and also the principal physical, chemical, or organoleptic characteristics of the product. And in this point, we should focus on the specific characteristics of our spirit drinks compared to spirit drinks of the same category, but that are not covered by our geographical indication. We should focus on that, on what is special about our spirit drink. We must also provide with a definition of the geographical area where the production takes place. As I already told you, this can be all the production steps or just one of the production steps. In addition, we must disclose the full method for obtaining the product, okay? From the production of the raw materials until we get the final product. And where appropriate, we must also disclose the authentic local production methods, okay, if they are special. And letter F, and this is probably the most important part of the product specifications. This is the part that justifies the recognition as a geographical indication. We must disclose or justify the link between the product and the geographical area. More specifically, the link between the quality, the reputation, or any other specific characteristic of the spirit drinks and that geographical area where it is produced. Okay? In that regard, we can mention natural factors like climate, a specific climate, soil, etc., or human factors, like a specific know-how, traditional knowledge, specific techniques that can only be found in the geographical area. Okay, that can be based on natural factors, on human factors, or like in most of the cases occurs, it can be based on a combination of both natural and human factors. We must also indicate the competent authority or the private body in charge of verification of compliance with the product specification. This is the authority or the body that undertakes the task to make sure that all the products that are labeled with the GI actually comply with the requirements of the product specification. Just take into account that if we are designated a private independent body, this must comply and be accredited with this international standard, 17065 of 2012, regarding the requirements for bodies certifying process or products. Okay. And these last two parts are optional. We can also, if it applies, disclose any labeling rules, like whether a specific logo must be used in the label, or whether there is, for instance, a specific terminology that has to be used in the label, depending on the category of the good we are marketing. I mean, many times in the geographical indication, we cover a variety of different goods. I mean, we are covering RAM, but RAM of different ages, for instance. So if we have a specific terminology for each kind of RAM, this can be disclosed in this part, the labeling rules. And lastly, the packaging or bottling rules. Okay. In this regard, first we must take into account that bottling is not considered per se a production step. Okay. So generally, if we don't explain anything in the product specification, the Commission will understand that bottling can be done in any place. Okay, but if we want to restrict the bottling to the geographical area, if we are willing to, we can also specify it here in this section. But only you must take into account that we should just justify the reason why bottling must take place in the geographical area. For instance, because it's important in order to safeguard the quality of the product, or it is important in order to ensure the origin, or in order to perform the control over the products. Okay, just a justification has to be exposed in order to have this restriction regarding bottling. And finally, a few remarks after registration. Once we get the registration, we are allowed, the producers that comply with the GI are allowed to use the official symbol of the European Union for geographical indications, completely optional. Okay, so it's up to the producers to use the symbol in the label of the product. You must consider that we will also get a very high level of legal protection, a really broad scope of protection against infringement. I mean, GIs are protected against evocation, they are protected against use of the GI with respect to comparable products, with respect to products, with respect to exploitation of their reputation, no matter what kind of products are concerned, and also when the spirit drink is used as an ingredient. Okay. If I have time, if I don't, I'm not run out of time, I will give some examples, some real example of how far the protection of geographical indication goes in the European Union. Okay, at the end of my presentation. Finally, two more remarks. We will get protection in the market against infringement, also in the trademark register, and I mean protection of the GI against trademark applications that are conflicted with the GI. And finally, also protection by our custom authorities. And in fact, the protection that is afforded in the European Union to GIs that are registered under the sui generis system, this protection applies ex officio. And by this, I mean that member states are required, the authorities of the member states are required to undertake any measure in order to prevent or stop the infringement against geographical indications, infringement that they are aware of. And with this, I finish with the very quick introduction of the sui generis system of geographical indication in the EU. And now we are going to see one case. This is the run from Guatemala that was registered in the European Union under this sui generis system. In fact, this was the second GI for a spirit drink of a third country registered in the EU under the sui generis system. Okay, first one was Pisco from Peru. Okay, in this case, the GI was applied for by ANFAL, the Asociación Nacional de Fabricantes de Alcoholes y Licores from Guatemala, and Well, Audrey was explaining about the complementarity between trademarks, geographical indication. Well, this is an example in which the group of producers undertook a strategy in order to get protection of under both forms of intellectual property. They first registered a collective trademark, and afterwards they went for the geographical indication registration. So this is the chronology of the registration of the collective trademark. The collective trademark for that logo you have in the slide, Rones de Guatemala. And as you can see, they initiated the procedures almost at the same time in nationally and in the European Union. So I guess the European market was an important one for this association of producers. In 2005, they filed the application nationally for a collective trademark, and in 2006, they filed an equivalent application in the EU. Okay, both were registered during the year of 2007. And they have also obtained registration in Switzerland, Canada, Costa Rica, Colombia, and other countries. Once they got the collective trademark registration, they went for the geographical indication. And at this slide, I would like to point out that, as you can see, nationally, they obtained a denominación de origen, designation of origin or appellation of origin, while in the European Union, they obtained a geographical indication. As I explained before, in the European Union, for spirit drinks, we can only get a geographical indication. So, in the practice, that means that when the products are marketed in Guatemala, they will be sold as a designation of origin. We will have the expression denominación de origen in the label, but they have to take care that these labels in the European Union does not contain such an expression, because in the European Union, they are protected under the concept of geographical indication. Okay. Here you have the chronology with all the milestones. First, they apply for the nationally for the denominación de origen in 2009, and 1 year later they apply for the GI in the European Union. At the national level, the denominación de origen was approved in 2012. And this is interesting, the GI application was published in the EU in 2012 as well. Once the application is published, that means that we have already passed the DG Agri's examination, the examination of the Commission, okay? But if you see here, it was not until 2014 that the GI was registered, okay? That was because an opposition was filed. I will tell you a bit about this opposition later on, okay? And in the meantime, in 2013, the GI Ron de Guatemala was protected under bilateral agreement, as Alessandra explained. Meanwhile, in this case, the European Union was negotiating an agreement with Central America, with the six countries of Central America, and they concluded this agreement establishing an association with a specific chapter on geographical indication. And Ron de Guatemala was protected under this agreement. So they got the protection under the agreement in 2013, and in 2014, finally, the Commission registered the GI under the sui generis system. For you to know, the protection, because if we get the protection under a bilateral agreement, we are not governed by this sui generis regulation I was talking about. We are governed by the specific rules, the articles we have in the bilateral agreement. In this case, for instance, the scope of protection that is granted in the bilateral agreement is lower than the scope of protection that is granted in the sui generis system. To give an example, the concept of vocation is not covered by the scope of protection in the bilateral agreement. And some facts about this geographical indication. Matt already anticipated, Bon already anticipated something. This is quite a particular geographical indication because, as Bon already explained, the geographical indicator is very narrow. In this case, we have two geographical areas, one for the planting of the sugar cane and the other for the aging of the final products. area for the production of the raw material, the planting of the sugarcane, is composed of 2 departments of the southern part of Guatemala, bordering the Ocean Pacific, as we see in this slide. Okay, bear in mind that Guatemala has 22 departments. In this case, only 2 of them were covered by the geographical area defined in the specification. In the aging area, only in one city, Quetzaltenango, which is located at over 2,000 meters above the sea level. Okay, this is where the aging takes place. And some notes about the link that is explained in the specification of these GIs. As you can imagine, if we are defining such a specific geographical indication, the link will be based mainly on natural factors. And this is the case here. We have a combination of both natural and human factors, but the natural factors play a very important role. This is taken from the specification as such. It says that the link is based on a combination of many factors stemming from the agroecological condition of both the planting area of the sugarcane and the aging area, as well as from the authentic character of the production process, which brings together nature, tradition, art, and science. Okay. We have here, this is interesting because we can see how the justification of the link works in the European Union. We have that the area for the cultivation of the sugar canes bears the typical characteristic of the tropical climates. We have there the values for average temperature, rainfall, and relative humidity. Okay, and it is claimed in the link that this kind of climate produces cane crops with high sugar level, which are essential for obtaining highly concentrated and effervescent juice of the best quality for the production of rum. So this is what a link looks like. We have to explain the specific characteristic of the area and how they affect the specific characteristic of the product. Okay, so the combination of both will be the link, the explanation of the link. And here the same but for the aging area. We have the values of altitude, temperature, and the same. And being the rams aged in such a high altitude, it is claimed that this slows down the chemical aging process, allowing the aromas and flavors to develop with greater intensity. Okay. The link is based in many other factors, but these are just 2 of them. And then we have some labeling rules about the terminology of the different categories of rams depending on the age of production and so on. As I explained, France filed an opposition against the registration of this GI. It was mainly based on some contradiction between the Guatemalan law, the technical law on production of rum, and the EU regulation. Okay, the opposition was finally rejected by the European Commission, explaining that even if there is that contradiction, the description of the product in the GI specification was in line with the definition of rum in the EU regulation and the other requirements therein. Okay, they also explain that the GI specification shows that the rules concerning the production which apply to rum de Guatemala are stricter than those applying to the standard rum produced in that country. Okay, the reason for rejecting the opposition. And now we change subject and we'll see the second case I have here, which is the rum for Cuba. Not too much to mention about this one because it has just been filed, the application for a GI in the European Union. It was filed in last month of April. The approach here is quite different. The applicant is Corporación Cuba Ron, which is an entity that gathers these 7 different rum producers. And in this case, the geographical area is the whole archipelago of Cuba. Okay, so this is completely different. We have the whole country to produce the product. Like in the Guatemala rum, all the production steps must take place in the defined area, both the production of the sugar cane and the production of the final of the final product. And we have also different varieties of rum covered by the GI. Ron Añejo, Carta Blanca, Extrañejo, and so on. Well, this is some important notes of the production and the link justifying the GI. Some of the most important characteristics I gather. At least 2 steps of aging must be done in order to produce the Cuban rum, and 3 if we are producing Extrañejo rums. And very important for the production of Cuban rum, the mezclas, what they call the mezclas, that it's basically mixing the rum spirits and the raw rums of different aging steps to produce the final product with the desired aroma and taste. And in this case, the link is based very much on the reputation, on natural factors like climate, specific crops of the sugar cane, and also human factors play an important role, specifically the maestros del ron cubano, which are the professional, which is behind the production of all the Cuban rums. Okay, this is a profession of very well reputation in Cuba. Okay. Interesting in this geographical indication, it was protected nationally, again, as a denominación de origen in the country of origin since 2010. And it was registered under the Lisbon Agreement in WIPO. Under the Lisbon Agreement, it was registered in 2015. Okay, so and if you are familiar with the Lisbon system, you will know that there are, I think it's 7 European countries that are party to the Lisbon Agreement. Okay, not the European Union as such, but 7 countries individually. They signed the Lisbon Agreement and became party of the Lisbon system. Okay, so we try to enforce before the recent application, GI application under the sui generis system in the EU. We have tried to enforce the protection of the GI under the Lisbon system in the territory of the European Union, and this has not been possible. And this is, I don't know if you are aware of that, but the Court of Justice, in these 2 judgments we have here, they explain that any kind of protection afforded to a GI that is not governed by the sui generis system or the bilateral agreements that are signed by the European Union is not enforceable, because the system, the European system of geographical indication in the whole European Union is exhaustive in nature, meaning that member states cannot grant protection nationally, at least to this kind of GIs, the ones that are governed at the EU level, that are spirits, wines, aromatized wines, and the rest of agro-food products. This resulted in that in the European Union, many trademarks that will be conflicting with the name Cuba will be registered in the European Union. Here we have some of them that you may already know them. We have Matusalén, using the label, they explain that it is produced under the original Cuban formula. Okay, these trademarks have been registered in the European Union because when they were applied for, no protection over the GI could be granted at the European territory. Okay, we have other example of trademarks that contain the name Cuba, cover spirit drinks, and they have been registered. Okay, once the GI will be registered under the sui generis system, these trademarks, in order to get registered, they will have to restrict the goods to rum complying with the GI specification of Cuba. Okay, this trademark cannot be registered any longer for rum as such, but the applicant will have to restrict the products to Cuba complying with, rum complying with the GI specification of Cuba. Okay. And finally, I will go very quickly through this example because actually it is not concerning a rum, it's tequila. This GI was also registered in the European Union under the sui generis system. The description is an alcoholic beverage obtained by distilling the juices extracted directly from the heart of the blue agave, previously or subsequently hydrolyzed or cooked or fermented using yeast. Okay, I picked this example just in order to, well, this is the geographical area, not much to talk about. I picked this case just to introduce the very quick examples I wanted to give you about the scope of protection that is afforded to GIs in the European Union. Okay. As you can see here, the GI in this case is registered since 2019, and the Consejo Regulador of Tequila has started a battle with with a Dutch company, Heineken, that are selling, that they are marketing beers with this label. You can see here. This says that this beer is flavored with aromatized tequila. Okay, this beer is produced with a very small quantity of tequila. I mean, they use authentic tequila covered by the GI, but in this beer they use very small quantity of tequila. In fact, what they use is an aroma made of just a couple of drops of tequila. Okay. This case is ongoing. We don't have a final decision yet. It's in the courts in Netherlands, but we have in the European Union another precedent involving the protected designation of origin champagne that is very similar. Okay, and this is just the two examples I wanted to give you in order to give you a very quick look about the scope of protection of GIs in the European Union. In this case, I think it was a German company was marketing this sorbet, kind of an ice cream that was also made with authentic champagne wine, okay, covered by the PDO. Indeed, it contained 12% of champagne as an ingredient. Okay, the group of producers of champagne found that still there could be an infringement of the PDO because it could take unfair advantage of the name of the protected designation of origin. Okay, in this case, well, what the court found, first you have to take into account that I'm referring to the judgment of the Court of Justice. It normally does not resolve the case on the merits. It just gives an interpretation on the European law in order for the national court to give a final ruling. Okay, but the conclusion of the court were very interesting. They say that this kind of practice could take unfair advantage of the reputation of the PDO if that ingredient does not confer on the final product its essential characteristics. Okay, they explain that it is not a question of identifying in the foodstuff in the ice cream the essential characteristics of the ingredient protected by the PDO, but of establishing that that foodstuff has an essential characteristic connected with that ingredient. Okay, that characteristic will often be the aroma, the taste imparted by that ingredient. In this case, the champagne. And they further explain that if the taste of the ice cream is more attributable to other ingredients contained in the final product, the use of this name, champagne sorbet, which contains the name champagne, will take unfair advantage of the reputation of the PDO. Okay, so this is an example of the very broad scope of protection of GIs in the European Union. And the last one is concerning another spirit, in this case whiskey. Very quickly, in this case, a German company was marketing whiskey under the name Glen Buchenbach. Okay, in the label it is disclosed that the whiskey is produced in Germany. Okay, so they don't try to sell it as a Scotch whiskey, but still the Scotch Association explained in the case that the word Glen is widely used in Scotland instead of the word valley. Okay, and they found that in particular, if this name Glen used as an element of the trademark in the name of Scottish whiskey, it evokes in the relevant public an association with Scotland and with Scotch whiskey. Okay, despite the fact that the true origin of the product may be disclosed in the label. Okay. In very few words, the Court of Justice found that even if the designation at stake, Glenbuchenbach and Scotch whiskey, have no similarity at all at the visual or phonetic level, still there could be a similarity on the conceptual level. Okay, so we could not disregard the existence of evocation in this case. Okay, and with this, I finish.
Thank you very much, Aitor, for your presentation. I think Vaughn wants to make a few brief remarks.
I think just to say as briefly as I can, I think some of what Aitor just presented illustrates the many avenues that are open to people who want to oppose IP establishment. There are people who will try to misuse marks, collective marks and GIs, and the process can be quite laborious. There are also many avenues to, I think as Matt mentioned, when you publish a GI in the EU, and the EU is in process of accepting it, there are also opposition periods and so on. So there are lots of ways in which the process can slow down, and we've seen a lot of that happen in the Dominican Republic as well. I wanted to address the whole issue of reputation, and whenever we talk about Caribbean rum, I like to say that Caribbean rums, whether it's Trinidad rum, Jamaica, Barbados, etc., Guyana, we were the original GIs long before GI became a phrase, because for 200-300 years, Jamaica or Barbados rum was known for its reputation and traded as in that situation as a bulk product, and tied to origin based on its reputation and certain flavor characteristics that it had. Now, as we develop more regulation and codify these things, people try to capture this in legislation. But I like to say that we were the original geographical indications. And it brings out an issue that is quite germane, especially in the Caribbean, because we came from a bulk industry, industry dominated by the trade of bulk product, often owned by trademarks overseas, where the aging was done overseas. You develop different business models in the Caribbean rum industry. So you have the business model of large bulk distilleries who would sell to brands that are based outside of the countries, and the aging would be done outside, and those products would continue to carry the nomenclature, Trinidad rum, Grenada rum, whatever. And then you have your branded products, in which you have producers in the Caribbean who do all the processes in the Caribbean and sell bottled product with their brands. And in theory, all of that value added, we think, is nice if it comes back to the country. But of course, there is a question as in terms of fairness, how do you manage the legitimate needs of the different business models that exist? And this is particularly applicable where we have GI applications where multiple producers are concerned. And at least in 2 states in our community, there are multiple producers. Many of the others that we talk about, Guatemala, Cuba, of course, is state-owned. Guatemala is one producer. They have a lot more control, and they can pretty much do what they want. And just one final point is we also regard, because I mentioned Scotch whiskey as a strong GI, tequila is also a very strong GI. And we regard tequila as a very pure and highly regulated product. And most people don't know, in fact, that the tequila GI is fairly loose in the sense that standard tequila, whether it's aged tequila or whatever, is really only have to be 51% tequila, and the rest of it can be sugarcane distillate, what we might call rum. It's only if you're buying 100% agave that you actually get a tequila that's fully made totally from agave products. So they've taken a very pragmatic approach that may be based on tradition as to how they sell tequila. And in fact, most consumers don't know that if drink an average tequila, half of that product is actually rum. So I'll stop there and let any questions come in. Thanks.
Thank you, Vaughn. And with that, I will close the webinar by, well, thanking you all for joining us today. And a special thanks for our presenters. Their presentations were very, very excellent. And the progression of the presentations were very, very logical. And I'm sure people were able to put the pieces together to get a good picture of how they can go about, one, choosing the right IP tool, and also to protect their GIs, whether it's rum or any other as well.